The blue lights of police cars flash in the dead of night. A frightened family huddled outside, scared of whomever or whatever is in their home. You and 5 other police officers enter the house. The lights are off, with only the street lights pouring through the windows to guide you. Your senses are heightened. You can almost hear the heartbeats of all your colleagues as you search through the home. They claim that after she died, strange things began to happen. Shadowy figures, voices, a sudden anxiety-inducing chill in the air. You touch a table along the hallway, and some strange liquid glistens on your fingers. A thunderous sound erupts. You run out to the terrace, but find nobody there. Are you looking for an intruder or a ghost? This is nonsense. You don't believe in the supernatural. But then, a police officer yells, "Inspector, come look!" As you rush through the apartment, the officer points to something on the wall. Something that turns your skin white, challenging everything you believe in.
Whoa! Look what I found.
A Ouija board? Grill, where'd you even find this?
Oh, well, I went into the attic, thought I heard a mouse up there. Figured I'd catch it and stop my rodent army. The place was actually pretty clean, organized. Didn't see a mouse, but then I saw this in one of the boxes.
Oh, I haven't been up there in years. That's peculiar.
Yeah, me neither. Want to give it a try? I doubt anything bad'll happen.
Why'd you say that?
Say what? That nothing bad'll happen?
Séance program initializing. Tonight, we request a high-bandwidth connection with the spectral network. Ooh. Now, deactivate ocular sensors. Intake appropriate oxygen-nitrogen blend. Engage the hippocampus to visualize a firewall around us to safeguard against hostile spirits. Now place digit extremities gently upon the planchette. Immediately, allow spectral entities to navigate the planchette.
Okay, you ready, spirits and ghosts?
This is silly.
Silence. Is any spectral unit located within this domicile?
Did you move it? Somebody is clearly moving it.
No, but somebody's totally pushing it. Seriously, stop it.
Cease motion. Error. Initiate emergency stop.
What was that?
I don't know.
Concentrate, meat bags.
Okay. Let's ask some real questions. Who is the coolest guy here? G-R-I-M? What? Grim? As in Reaper? Quick, destroy it!
Grill, you don't need to...
You don't want to be messing around with things you don't understand, young pup.
Ah!
Now put down the board, nice and slowly, and walk away.
Who are you? Bro, call the cops! Howard, activate anti-intruder turret things!
No such systems exist.
The name is Grim.
Oh!
Grim lurks. I live at this residence.
Oh, phew. Wait, live here? Are you the noises from the attic?
I can neither confirm or deny that, but right now, I'm more concerned about the dangerous tool of divination you've activated. This is something you don't want to be messing around with. Not unless you want to find yourself in an early grave. Or worse.
Ouija boards are toys. Nothing more.
Far from it. I've seen things. Heard things. Let me tell you, dearest brew.
How do you know my name?
When Ouija boards go wrong, boy, do they go wrong. The spirits it can call upon only want to turn your life into chaos and blur that inescapable divide between the living and the dead.
That's my desk. Oh yeah, please continue. Mi casa es tu casa, apparently.
Let me tell you 2 factual stories of seances gone wrong.
Ooh, a double feature horror show.
In both these tales, 2 naive teenage girls played with forces they didn't understand. They let darkness through, and it toppled the dominoes, culminating in lives unjustly torn apart by possession, hauntings, death, and murder.
This guy's intense.
And I even have proof in the form of official documents.
Oh, bro, you love those.
That is my favorite type of document.
For the first story, we find ourselves in the late 1980s in Vallecas, a suburb of Madrid in Spain. With an influx of low-class workers and crime, it had come to be known as the slums of Madrid. It wouldn't be uncommon to find abandoned casa bajas or bungalows in disarray at every corner. The neighborhood was becoming a ghost of itself. The teenagers of Vallecas needed to find creative ways to occupy their time, and that was no different for Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro. Despite coming from a religious and superstitious conservative upbringing, she developed a love for the black arts. She had herself a mini library of books on the occult, and often used a Ouija board, either with friends or by herself. But despite her fringe interests, she was outgoing, sociable, and rarely ever found herself without a boyfriend, and was often seen as the mother of her friend group. As the second eldest of her 3 sisters, she found herself standing up for her younger siblings, especially the youngest sister, Marianella. They spent a lot of time together, which naturally meant Marianella was pulled into the occult as well, and would unfortunately be pulled into a séance that would plunge their entire family into darkness. A family of 3 brothers and 3 sisters lived with their mother, father, and maternal grandfather. Unfortunately, he was not well, suffering from Alzheimer's. It's truly a terrible disease that, among other things, can turn your loved ones aggressive with mood swings and depression. He was verbally abusive to the entire family. Then, in 1990, their grandfather was on his deathbed, and with the whole family huddled around, he uttered his terrible final words. "I will make trouble for the family from the other side." After his passing, his ominous warning lingered in their minds, and they were worried it was a curse that would come back to haunt them. One day, shortly after her grandfather's death, the 17-year-old Estefania and her younger sister Marianella had walked into school ready for a normal day. Except, it would be anything but normal. A fellow student had approached Estefania, knowing of her experiences with the occult. This student was the girlfriend of a boy who had also gone to the school, but died in a tragic motorcycle accident. She wanted to summon a spirit. Being the rebellious kids they were, Estefania, Marianella, the girlfriend of the deceased boy, and some of their friends skipped their class and set up their séance in an empty classroom. Amongst the candlelight, everyone placed their fingers on a small glass, which sat upon the Ouija board that Estefania had made with a marker and cardboard, and they began to commune with an unknown spirit. As the séance went on, Estefania, still disturbed and torn up by her grandfather's death, decided to ask the spirit about him. Unexpectedly, a teacher burst into the room. Angry at the girls for taking part in such a demonic activity, she yelled at them and grabbed the Ouija board, tearing it in half. In the process, the glass fell and shattered into pieces on the floor. But then, from the torn remains of the board, a smoke emerged and danced supernaturally through the air. It slithered towards Estefania, entering her nose and mouth, to the horror of everyone watching, before it disappeared within. There are contradicting details here, as there often are with stories of this nature. Some claim that the glass didn't fall, but exploded when the board was torn, and that was actually the source of the smoke, not the board itself. In some accounts, it takes place in a Catholic school, in a bathroom, and it was a nun who had torn the board in half. But what's clear about the story is that after this incident, everything changed for Estefania. First, her entire demeanor was different. No longer the bright and bubbly girl. She had been replaced with someone irritable and paranoid, who lashed out at her family. But worst of all, she started to hear things in the dead of night. Footsteps down the hallway when no one was there. Whispers, noises, and she could swear that someone was pacing around her bed at night. But all this was just the beginning, and it would get far worse than just noises in the night.
No. I am never touching a Ouija board ever again.
Oh, you're gonna have to.
Wait, what? Why?
It's part of the rules.
Rules? I thought it was just a game, like Monopoly. Why are there rules?
Monopoly has rules. We've done this a million times. Just because you burn the rule book does not mean there are no rules to Monopoly.
Maybe the way you play it.
A Ouija board has gotten that reputation. A fun game to play late at night at slumber parties. But it's been misconstrued and twisted from its deep historical roots in spiritualism. Following the many personal losses stemmed from the Civil War, the 19th century saw the rise in spiritualism in the United States. They were obsessed with contacting the dead, and it wouldn't be uncommon for ordinary people to hold a weekly séance. Psychography, originating from China in 1100 AD, for example, was very popular. A medium would hold a pen or gently touch what's known as a planchette, which is a heart-shaped board with a hole in it to hold a pen, and the spirits would guide them to write out words. Spiritualism worked alongside the dogma of Christianity, and contacting the dead was seen as normal once upon a time. Now, not so much.
Oh yeah, let's open the fiery gates of hell and let in all kinds of demons. And then the next day we'll go to church.
But in 1886, there was a new, faster way to communicate with the dead, called the talking board. It was a new thing taking over spiritualist camps run by churches in Ohio. The board contained numbers, letters, and a planchette that pointed to them. It was Charles Kennard who saw the potential to make money from these things and brought the board to life in 1891.
Wait, it's called a talking board? Where did Ouija even come from?
I can answer that. It comes from a combination of the French and German word for yes, oui, and ja.
It's a common misconception, bud. It's actually when Helen Peters, a strong medium, asked the board what they should call it. It's spelled out Ouija.
Ooh, someone corrected you. Haha, never thought I'd see the day.
Yeah, and I didn't expect another person to break into my house like this, so today's full of surprises. Besides, I don't really concern myself with the paranormal.
You're missing out on a whole breadth of experiences, pal. Since then, this tool that bridges the two worlds has been at the center of many strange paranormal events that keep me up at night. Exorcists and paranormal investigators have been warning people about Ouija boards for a long time. They say that demons will masquerade as loved ones to gain possession of the living.
So, is that what happened to Estefania? That's what that smoke was? A demon?
Grimm said himself that the story has multiple versions. The smoke was likely dramatic embellishment that usually happens with stories passed down verbally. In fact, it often happens, because memories are more like puzzles with missing pieces rather than a video recorder, which is why eyewitness testimony in court is so unreliable. Memories are very easily influenced, especially if you're trying to impress or fit in, like teenagers often do.
Not me. I was so cool in high school, they called me Mr. Cool. Damn it, girl, keep it together. So, you think the smoke thing never happened, or what?
Maybe not, or maybe there was smoke. Off the top of my head, one explanation could be that when the teacher tore the board frantically, it was burned by one of the candles. Not enough for it to fully catch on fire, but enough for smoke to be produced.
That's a pretty excellent theory.
Oh, really? I'll admit, I kinda thought you'd fight me on that.
You might find it hard to believe this, but I'm a man of science myself. There's no reason that spiritualism and science both can't coexist.
What are you? Like a paranormal investigator or something?
Or something. Whether there was smoke or not, what's important is that she started a séance, contacted a spirit, the board was broken, and the portal was never closed.
Portal?
There's a couple rules you need to follow while using a Ouija board that are fundamentally important, or else you risk dangerous things. You can find long lists online for sure, but for me, I like to stick to 3. First, if the planchette starts to go through the letters from A to Z, the numbers 1 through 0, or starts moving in a figure 8, end the session. That is a malevolent spirit trying to get out. Second, always end a session by saying goodbye. If the planchette doesn't go there on its own, you make it go there. Or else you could be leaving the portal wide open.
Oh no, we never did that. Bro, we got it.
Calm down, Grill, he's just trying to scare you.
I am trying to scare you, but only because I don't want to see harm befall upon you. You're like brothers to me.
You're like a brother to me too.
We just met.
Correction, you just met me. As for my 3rd rule, never, ever destroy a Ouija board. Setting it on fire or breaking it apart is the worst thing you can do with it. Especially mid-session, it will release a spirit.
Oh no, I was about to rip it apart. Thank goodness you showed up. Wait, Estefania, the Ouija board was broken before they could close the portal.
Yes, sir. And as you'll see, there would be hell to pay. Similar to what happened to another teenage girl who made the mistake of leaving the portal open. Meet Bessie Brown. Like Estefania, she too came from a big religious family. Born in 1913, she was the 4th of 9 children, raised in the very strict Mormon community of Provo, Utah. The Mormons had been driven there to form their own colony away from the rest of the country. This was a place steeped in superstition, with stories of ghosts haunting the hills and farms at night. But this wasn't what haunted Bessie, at least not at first. Mormons at the time believed in the death penalty, and so on one cold winter morning, before the sun had risen, she along with her brothers and sisters were shuffled into the family wagon and jostled along the dark road to watch something that no child should ever have to witness. When they arrived, Bessie could see the noose and the executioner standing next to it. But what happened next, she refused to watch. She only heard the crack of the trapdoor opening, the snap of the rope, and cheers from the crowd. Perhaps thinking that the nasty ordeal was over with, she decided to look, and that's when she bore witness to an image that would be forever seared into her memories. A man hanging dead, for all to see. And while it didn't seem like a big deal to her parents, who thought of it as a teaching lesson, it was enough to scar her still developing mind. Bessie grew up hating her own people and became a classic rebellious teenager, drinking and smoking, which broke 2 very strict Mormon rules. She was even forbidden from seeing her boyfriend at the time, so she dated him in secret. One night, after having broken her curfew for the 4th time, she'd arrived on her porch where her secret boyfriend gave her a goodbye kiss. But her father burst through the door and pointed a shotgun, not at her boyfriend, but directly at her, while calling her things that I do not wish to repeat. Before he could pull the trigger, her brother George stepped in, pulling the gun away. They were both violently punished by their father that night, but this sadly wasn't an isolated occurrence. Her father constantly hurt her and her siblings, often and on a regular basis. It was October of 1926 when everything changed. Halloween was right around the corner, and 16-year-old Bessie had just listened to a cautionary tale from the bishop at Sunday school about the dangers of a Ouija board. The bishop personally knew 2 Mormons who tried to conjure the dead, and in the process, ended up dead themselves. Nailed to the wall, hair white from shock, with Ouija boards at their feet. So, naturally, Bessie wanted to get one for herself.
Naturally.
A week later, she would get her wish when she came across a Ouija board in a 5-and-dime store. She brought it home in secret, since her parents would obviously never approve. One night, Bessie and her sister Alta lit a candle in the girl's bedroom. They sat cross-legged with the Ouija board on their knees while the other sisters watched or joined. But some were not having it, like Wanda, who threatened to tell their mother. Bessie threatened her in return to keep quiet. First, they asked, "Is anybody there?" The silence was deafening as all the girls huddled to watch the planchette finally move to yes. When they asked, "Who are you?" the planchette moved again and spelled out,
I am a dead Indian.
And then suddenly, a ghostly wail erupted in the room. It was their sister Wanda, crying and trembling. Their mother burst through the door, saw the Ouija board and proclaimed, "What have you brought in my house?" Alta, despite having taken part, was usually one of the good daughters, so her mother told Alta to burn the Ouija board.
No, don't burn it. And the portal, close it.
But, taking a note from Bessie's playbook, she didn't listen, and instead hid the board in the barn.
Oh, phew.
You won't be saying that in a moment. A week later, it was Halloween, and the whole house was asleep except for Bessie and Alta. The rebellious duo snuck out the window into the barn on this silent autumn night. The flicker of a kerosene lamp helped Alta find the board, and they got right back to where they were. Again, cross-legged, with the board at their knees. This time they didn't have their bothersome sisters with them, especially Wanda. In fact, they were alone. Well, mostly, because the planchette started to move, to finish what it started. The letter spelled out,
I am a dead Indian. I was killed because I killed a man. He stole from me. I want back.
A creak startled them, and as they turned their head, there was the imposing silhouette of their father in the moonlight. Fury lit a fire under his feet as he yelled, asking if they had given themselves to the devil. He reached for an axe, lifted it above his head, and in a blind rage, chopped that board into pieces.
Oh, they didn't close the portal.
It would only be a year later when the first of many tragic events that plagued Bessie's family would occur. It was a cool winter evening when a friendly neighbor was pulling a sled with his horse near their house. He offered both Alta and Wanda a ride, and they agreed with enthusiasm. Alta was lying flat, and Wanda went on top of Alta. But before they could leave the front of the house, something spooked the horse, and it kicked the sled, sending the girls flying, smashing them into a utility pole. The front of Alta's skull was broken from the impact, but she was alive, even if barely, and tried to turn over. Meanwhile, Wanda wasn't moving. When the doctor arrived, he proclaimed that Alta was now dead. Wanda was unconscious and needed immediate medical attention. So, they rushed her to the hospital. Luckily, she survived, but the left side of her body was now paralyzed for the rest of her life. Nobody knew what spooked the horse that day except for Bessie. She knew. It had to be the spirit that she and Alta had conjured up. Alta was now dead, and Bessie wondered if she might be next. A few weeks later in the girl's bedroom, a white light appeared in the dark of night. A white light that materialized as Alta. She sat on the bed and told the girls that she was all right. She was very happy and she loved them. Then the light dimmed and Alta was gone forever.
You tell such great stories.
We haven't even got to the end of them yet.
Yes, very tragic and creepy, but the only issue I have with these stories is that Ouija boards aren't actually a thing.
Bro, we were just using one. You suffering from caffeine withdrawal or something?
No, I mean it has nothing to do with spirituality or the occult.
Bro, you saw the thing move.
It moved because we were moving it, just not on purpose. It's called the ideomotor response.
Idio what now?
Ideomotor. Ideo meaning idea and motor meaning movement. It means that our thoughts influence our movements, even if we don't realize it. Have you ever tapped your foot or fingers to the music without realizing it, or matched someone's gestures during conversation unconsciously?
No. Oh.
These aren't ideomotor responses exactly, but they're unconscious responses influenced by external stimuli. Ideomotor responses are a bit like that, except they're influenced by internal stimuli, like thoughts and mental images. They influence very subtle movements like Ouija boards, dowsing rods, and automatic writing, or psychography as Grimm referred to it. Since the participants aren't aware they're doing the movement, they believe there's some sort of spiritual interaction.
Well, that makes sense.
That could be an explanation, but is it true for all cases? Why does one possibility eliminate the others? Does science need to be able to explain everything? Or can we consider the possibility that there are things that operate outside the realm of science?
He's right. It could still be ghosts.
Yeah, sure, it could be, but probably isn't because unlike ghosts, the ideomotor response has been tested many times. There's even been experiments conducted where Ouija board participants were blindfolded, like in the National Geographic's Brain Games, where they took participants and used a Ouija board to summon a demon. At first, it seemed as if they had contacted one, as it was answering their questions. Then, they were blindfolded. From that point forward, the answers were gibberish, many times landing in blank areas or between letters.
Okay, well that proves it. What? You're both very convincing, alright?
Well, what you're saying may be true for most cases. There's too many stories where the paranormal events continued beyond the board, and with the board acting as the epicenter. In fact, that's exactly what happened in both of our stories. After the Ouija board encounter at school, 17-year-old Estefania, now irritable, paranoid, and not like herself, was beginning to have very odd and concerning experiences. In the middle of the night, she'd be in her bed half asleep, only to be woken fully by the creak of a nearby floorboard. Was it those ghostly footsteps she often heard in the hallway when her whole family was asleep? No, it was in her room. Creak, creak, creak. It paced around her bed. She tried to look for them, call out to them, but no response. When she turned on the light, she'd be alone in her room, and the footsteps would stop. Since the Ouija board's smoke had entered her body, these strange moments would be a regular occurrence for Estefania. If she could actually sleep, nightmares would plague her. She would dream of shadowy figures wearing hooded robes at the end of an ominous foggy hallway. These dark spirits would call out to her.
Estefania, Estefania, come with us.
She felt the pull, like a sailor to the mythical siren. Her family would hear her muttering things in another language, something dark and sinister.
Oh, this is like some of that Harry Potter stuff, when he'd start talking in parcel tongue.
It didn't end there. As time went on, she started to growl and bark at her family members when they irritated her. Throwing things, hitting them, spitting on them.
Was she possessed by a grandfather or a demon dog? Or both?
Now it's unclear, but her grandfather is one of those theories. Those hooded figures that would appear in her dreams would now also appear to her in real life, haunting her. She wouldn't sleep anymore. She didn't dare. During the day, she would suddenly stop speaking, staring at seemingly nothing. Her family would ask her questions, try to get her attention, wave their hands in front of her, but she'd be stuck in some kind of trance for 15 minutes at a time. When she'd finally come to, she'd just start laughing for no reason. And one night, her little sister Marianella caught a glimpse of Estefania across the room they shared, and couldn't process what she was seeing. There was her sister, levitating silently above her bed, still asleep. Something was truly wrong with Estefania.
You think?
And it would only get worse. Now, the whole family was experiencing something strange.
In your neighborhood. Who you gonna call? Sorry.
If phantom files appear in your system core, what will you activate? Antivirus.
Ghostly whispers, mysterious banging noises, and the younger children would be pushed and slapped by some invisible entity. And a classic sign of ghostly hauntings, things would go missing and end up in strange places.
Oh yeah, that happens to me all the time. 1 minute, I'm holding a can of yeet. Then it's not there. Then, later on, I find it in the dishwasher. Wait, are we haunted?
No, that's just the keys, or in your case, the energy drink in the dishwasher syndrome. You and many others are just not paying attention to where you place things.
If it was an isolated incident, perhaps that's what's happening here. But it's not. Especially because Estefania started suffering from seizures. Now epilepsy ran in her family, so they believed bad genetics was the issue at first. However, her mother never had seizures as intense as Estefania's. She was brought to 4 medical centers, where she saw numerous specialists who all assumed epilepsy, but the psychological and medical tests came back normal or inconclusive. Epilepsy medication didn't help her either. One time, a horrendous scream pierced through the home. Her mother rushed to the source, which was Estefania in the bathroom. But before the mother could reach her daughter, the door slammed without anyone having touched it. Bang! Estefania and her mother tried with all their strength to open the door, as if it was being held closed by something superhuman. Estefania's father rushed there, lifted his leg ready to kick down the door, when it suddenly opened by itself with no effort. As the months went by, Estefania started to talk about her eventual doom, with the spirits calling for her more and more. She even asked for a photograph of her and her father to be placed in her coffin when she would be buried. Imagine the family having to watch this happen to their sister, to their daughter. It must have been terrible to see her slipping away, to see her crippled by seizures and visions that were only getting more intense by the day. It was July 12th, 1991, when things would truly spiral. More than a year since the Ouija board incident, she turned rabid. She was barking at her siblings, trying to bite them, foaming at the mouth, and falling to the ground in dangerous convulsions. The next day, she woke up feeling fine. She went out with her boyfriend, they had a family supper, and then, after supper, she had a seizure, and was foaming at the mouth. It was so bad that she was rushed to the hospital and fell into a coma by 11 p.m., but by 3 a.m. on July 14th, 1991, she had passed away.
Oh no.
But this wouldn't be the end of the family story. What's even stranger is the doctors deemed her death suspicious. It's unclear what they meant by this, but one can speculate.
Ghosts? Murder? Ghost murder? Wait, can you die from a seizure?
Yes, you can. It's very tragic, but in this case, very explainable. Let's break it down. She was experiencing visions, mood changes, staring off into space, convulsions, and she had a family history of epilepsy, including her mother.
So...
Epilepsy.
But that can't be all epilepsy, right? And are you telling me that you know more than doctors? They went to 4 places.
I'm not saying that I know more than doctors, and this, of course, is not real medical advice. But there is something strange about those claims. The story seems to imply that they were testing to see if she had epilepsy, but more likely they were just trying to determine why. In regard to testing for epilepsy, the NHS, which is the publicly funded healthcare system of England, states on their website, "But if these tests do not show anything, it's still possible you have epilepsy, and you may be diagnosed just based on your symptoms." There are several tests that can be done, but epilepsy is complex, and the reason why they have it can be different for everybody and hard to pinpoint. The tests may also be inconclusive just because you weren't having a seizure during the time of the testing.
So if they didn't know, couldn't the epilepsy be caused by possession? Like a grandfather doing voodoo stuff from beyond the grave.
While there are still some unknowns, that's a stigma that the epilepsy community is always facing and needs to change. It used to be believed that epilepsy was caused by demonic possession before we understood it, but even in modern times, people still associate it with demonic possession, which can be dangerous if that becomes a replacement for an actual diagnosis and treatment. Like if parents have their child see an exorcist instead of a doctor.
So then what's going on if demons aren't pulling the strings?
In your brain, you have neurons that help you do everything from keeping your heart beating to walking to figuring out what you're going to eat. They do this by sending well-timed electrical signals. Think of it like lots of cars traveling through roads with traffic lights keeping everything flowing nicely. A seizure is like an electrical storm through the neurons. If all the cars suddenly sped up and the traffic lights all changed to green, it would cause pileups and mayhem everywhere. This does odd things to your body.
But why'd she get all moody and stuff?
A well-known symptom of epilepsy is mood disorders. They can feel anxious, depressed, irritable, and exhibit fear, panic, or even pain.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about all those crazy visions?
That's typically associated with temporal lobe epilepsy. The temporal lobe is the area of the brain that deals with speech, hearing, vision, and memory. They can have hallucinations where they smell things and see things that aren't there, and they might hear things like people talking. They might even have trouble speaking.
The parcel tongue. But hey, what about those random blank stares into nothing? That's creepy, no?
She could have been having a seizure.
What? I'm confused.
When people think of seizures, they tend to think of a tonic-clonic seizure. The person's muscles seize, expelling air as a cry, followed by a loss of consciousness and convulsions. However, seizures can vary widely. Muscles can tense, go limp, twitch, or jerk, while some cause no movement at all. The person suffering from a seizure might stare blankly and be fully, partially, or completely unaware, depending on the type of epilepsy. She probably had a focal impaired awareness seizure, which typically involves blank staring and maybe talking gibberish.
And laughing right after?
That one I'm not as sure about. There is a type of seizure that can make you laugh uncontrollably, but it's not common with temporal lobe epilepsy. While epilepsy doesn't explain everything, it explains more of it than ghosts and ghouls. Maybe the levitating was caused by a seizure that made her back arch, and her sister only saw it in the dark. Maybe she was going through something mentally to act like a feral dog.
Touché, my friend. I'll give you this one. You're right. There's typically a lot of fear coming around epilepsy. It can be dangerous if they go a spiritual route first, sometimes leading to a misdiagnosis.
Told you were convincing.
However, as you'll soon learn, these events, regardless of their explanation, would lead to a haunting like no other for Estefania's family, a fate that Bessie and her own family would also come to share. They would experience someone, or something, in their home that makes my bones shudder every time I hear the story, even to this day. Bessie Brown had already paid quite the price for playing with the Ouija board as a child, losing one sister and watching another struggle through life paralyzed. And now, even as an adult, she would continue to feel the effects. She was around 24 years old in the summer of 1937 when she met Frank Gilmore. He was an older gentleman of 47 who she fell for instantly. Frank had lived an interesting life. He once worked as a tightrope clown in the circus with the stage name Laffo.
Oh, ew. I hate clowns.
Then, he worked as a lion tamer. Then, as a Hollywood stuntman for silent movies. Reminds me a bit of my colorful past.
Wait, you weren't a clown, were you?
I cannot confirm.
Nor deny, yeah. Alright, keep your secrets then.
Much of those periods of his life involved quite a bit of drunkenness and injury, though. leaving him with a bad leg, scars on his face, and missing teeth. These were all the tall tales that he would tell Bessie with a bottle of whiskey in his hand. It was after she married Frank on a whim that she learned about his true nature. It was during a long and unexpected trip that left Bessie alone with her mother-in-law when the old woman revealed that he went by many names, like Walter Kaufman or Francis Seville, which was how he was able to hide from all of his previous marriages and children and all the people he'd conned. The mother told her he was using his real first name with Bessie, at least, even if Gilmore wasn't his real last name.
I knew he was a monster.
Well, he's not the main monster, but yeah, Frank's mother Faye, an interesting character in her own right, had striking white hair, brilliant blue eyes, and a youthfulness to her, despite being in a wheelchair. And her story was similarly wild to the ones Frank told, made up or not. Faye was a practicing psychic and fortune teller, and according to her, she was a damn good one. Bessie begged Faye to never perform any seances around her. She had enough of spirits, and didn't want to anger them any further. Faye agreed, but unfortunately, this promise wouldn't do much to keep the family safe from the spirit that Bessie conjured those many years ago. Faye was also a licensed minister in the Spiritualist Church of California, and had a history in show business. She was once good friends with Harry Houdini, and she helped him greatly in his early career. But when Frank and Faye drank together, they would call Harry Houdini terrible names, which Bessie took as a sign he had wronged them in some way. She also learned that Frank's real father, whose name was never revealed, was a man who went on to be famous, and died by being punched in the stomach.
Wait, are you telling me Frank is the son of Houdini?
Nope. Turns out that Faye had been lying to everyone about this, including Frank. Why is unclear. Perhaps to hide a past that she didn't want to face, but it shows that lying and conning is in Frank's DNA. But regardless of what were lies and what was truth, it was obvious to Bessie that she had married into a troubled family. But she decided to stay. Even when Frank became abusive and would disappear out of her life time and time again, Bessie wouldn't go. They lived the life of nomads, moving from residence to residence, changing their names. Also, Frank could evade the law or someone he'd angered. It was into this unstable home that Bessie bore 3 boys. In 1946, they ended up staying with their mother-in-law, Faye, for a bit, while Frank left for another one of his long trips. Bessie, still very unnerved by the seances that Faye performed, always took the boys out of the house on those nights. But sadly, that wouldn't be enough. One night, Faye was trying to contact a very disturbed spirit who had died under suspicious circumstances, possibly murder. Bessie had gone out with her boys to see a movie, but upon arrival back to the house, after the seance was done, the place had an old and rotten stench that welcomed them. There was an aura of unease around the place, as if something had gone wrong. Faye was sitting there, paler than usual, shaking, her face helpless and afraid. Bessie put Faye and her kids to bed, and despite the foreboding presence she felt, Bessie managed to fall asleep herself. Late that night, she heard someone moving through the house. Remembering that Frank had mentioned he'd be home soon, figured it was him, and fell right back asleep.
It wasn't him, was it?
No, sir. She'd be awoken again by an intimate, loving touch. She pressed herself against whom she assumed was Frank, but when the touch turned unsettling, even disturbing, she opened her eyes. It wasn't Frank. The face she saw in bed with her was shadowy, almost human-like, but not. Predatory, leering, hungry, real. The sheer terror of it all suffocated her like a thick fog, freezing her in place. But there's no force more powerful than a mother trying to save her children. So she bolted from her bed and room and yelled out to them, Frankie, Gary, Galen. She had to keep them safe. She had to get them out. But in the hallway, Faye, who normally bound to a wheelchair or bed, now appeared entranced and on her 2 feet. She rushed towards Bessie with her white, ethereal hair flowing behind her and yelled out, Bessie, you must leave here. You must leave this house now. It knows, Bessie. It knows who you are. Frankie called out to his mother, with tears streaming. He pointed into Gary's room. She rushed to the door to witness what was threatening her son. The demonic, shadowy figure loomed over Gary's bed, its supernatural face hovering, staring at Gary as if prey for the taking. Bessie ran into the room, grabbed Gary just in time, and pulled him away. Then, she grabbed Galen and rushed her 3 boys out of the house. Faye had remained, but Bessie figured the medium could handle the spirits. They stayed that night in the bus depot. While Faye's words still echoed in her mind, it knows who you are. Bessie knew the spirit, the one that had followed her since childhood, since that Ouija board was cut to pieces. The same spirit that paralyzed one sister and killed the other. Now it was here, unleashed by Faye's seance to terrorize her family. In the days following, she refused to visit the home at night, staying at a nearby hotel, only coming home during the day to help care for Faye. When Frank arrived back from his business trip, they moved to San Diego. Faye, shortly after this incident, passed away. Her heart had just mysteriously stopped, but Bessie knew why. Shortly after Faye's death, Gary Gilmore would start having vivid and disturbing dreams about being beheaded, and he swore that there was something in his room many nights. Bessie suspected that the spirit had somehow attached to her son,
Oh, definitely. Wait, Gary Gilmore. Why does that name sound familiar?
Why does that sound familiar?
It wouldn't be the only time they encountered the spirit. They had their fourth son in 1951, Michael Gilmore. But Bessie felt like there was something wrong with him. She was found one day by Frank with a pillow over the baby's crib, ready to snuff out her son's life. Frank stopped her, but then proceeded to hurt her severely with one of his usual beatings.
But she had been so badass before, saving her kids from that demon thing. Now she wanted to end her newborn's life? Why?
Perhaps it was related to the demonic entity, but I acknowledge it could very well have been postpartum depression. Something very real that wouldn't have been properly diagnosed at that time. When the family moved to Salt Lake, into a 3-bedroom house at the edge of the city, Bessie felt a malevolent presence in the house. There were noises that didn't make sense, and something was breathing on their faces, which all the boys felt. It was especially strong with the ones whose life Bessie almost cut short, Michael. Often, Michael would be babbling, and something would speak back to him. But when someone would enter the room, he'd be alone, pointing at something that wasn't there. Then one night, again while Frank was away on a trip, Bessie heard that same voice that had been talking to Michael, but louder and more clear. She entered the room to find the same spirit from Faye's house, with a shadow, inhuman face, leering over Michael this time. She yelled and it disappeared before it could attach itself to her son. Frank would never take any of it seriously, always finding the ghost story silly, and assumed all the sounds were just a mouse. She told him, "I saw the damn thing, Frank. If it was a mouse, then it was a big mouse, with a face from hell." A few months later, family was in the living room when strange noises occurred all around, leaving them on edge. But then, they heard something break the silence of the night, a moan from the attic, like a ghoulish creature caught in the throes of death. Bessie turned to Frank and said, "How would you like to go up there and have a talk with that big mouse?" He didn't, and the next day, they put that house up for sale. But unfortunately, this entity would follow the Gilmore family and lead them down a path so dark that they would eventually beg the entity for their own death.
Well, that was, awful. Hey, you know what would be really great right about now? If someone debunked all this as a bunch of hooey. Isn't that right, bro?
There's a lot to unpack. Collective memories, environmental factors, confirmation bias, but I think the main takeaway is that Bessie could have suffered from sleep paralysis, or even just the associated hypnopompic hallucinations.
They were hypnotized?
Hypno means sleep. Hypnopompic hallucinations are a state of hallucinations that can occur when you're just waking up, a bit like a waking dream. There's also something similar when you're just falling asleep. Sleep paralysis, on the other hand, is when you wake up and have similar hallucinations but are unable to move. Sometimes it translates to a demon that might be in the room or sitting on your chest, often referred to as sleep paralysis demons. They're not real, but if there's ever a feeling of someone being in your room while you're half asleep, it could very well be sleep paralysis or just common hallucinations. If she was up and walking around but still waking up, she could have continued having hallucinations, like Faye running towards her or the demon in Gary's room. These hallucinations can be triggered by stress or anxiety, and Bessie likely felt a lot of that after seeing the state Faye was in that night, given Bessie's fear of the paranormal. There's even a genetic factor, so she could pass sleep paralysis onto her children, which could explain why Gary might have felt a presence in his room. He was having terrible nightmares about being beheaded, which was likely triggered by stressors in his life, such as Frank's abusive behavior.
Well, sleep paralysis is still a mystery. A lot of unknowns there. So, it could still be tied in with the paranormal.
I doubt it.
Well, what about that demon in the attic?
No idea, but maybe it really was just a big mouse.
Well, I'm glad our mouse in the attic wasn't a mouse. Or a demon. Right, Grim?
Last time I checked, I'm not. But perhaps demons don't know they're demons.
Ah, yeah, you're just messing with me.
I don't mess around with the supernatural.
Oh.
You're a tough nut to crack, Brew. But let's get back to Estefania's family for a moment. Maybe that'll convince you. After all, it's the first police-documented paranormal event in the history of Spain.
Ooh, documents! I mean, we'll see, Grim. We'll see.
The Lazaro family was mourning Estefania's passing, and the paranormal events had died down. They had hoped she was the source of the haunting. However, the hope was short-lived. They heard things. Estefania's voice screaming. Their great-grandfather laughing. Objects would move, glasses would move, and now they were seeing the hooded shadow figures that Estefania had claimed to see. Estefania's mother, Concepcion, described feeling a cold hand touching her while laying in bed, paralyzed.
Sounds like sleep paralysis.
I wouldn't discount it, but with everything else going on, signs point to the fact it might have been paranormal in nature. The children even started to see a shadowy creature crawling on the floor, with spikes, tossing their toys everywhere. Every time it disappeared, the spot it disappeared from was cold to the touch. They needed help, and so they went on their search. That's when they came across a man called Tristan Breaker. This man was a scam artist, sullying the name of parapsychologists, those who study paranormal psychic phenomena, all in the name of fame.
A parapsychologist such as yourself?
He did an investigation for the Antenna 3 Channel News, in which he showed a bathroom full of items that supposedly belonged to Estefania, claiming that the bathroom was an interdimensional portal. But he had planted those items there himself. They faked everything for the broadcast, including a moment where they spoke to the demon through a family member. The family revealed this scam in a television program called the Esta Noche Cruzamos El Mississippi. They felt duped because after he claimed to rid the house of paranormal activity, it not only still continued after he left, it got worse. After this incident shattered their trust for so-called experts, they didn't know what to do. But the one thing that Tristan Breaker was right about was that the bathroom was the epicenter of it all. Concepcion heard Estefania's voice call to her from the bathroom in an attempt to lull her in. But she knew that somehow that wasn't Estefania. The hooded figures they saw would go in and out of the bathroom, so they implemented a buddy system when going there, and they moved all their mattresses into the living room so they could all sleep together. But it all culminated on November 19th, 1992. They saw the spiky creature again, and they tried to scare it away. They gathered at the door when a ball rolled down the hallway towards them. Their father grabbed the ball and threw it into the hallway, hoping to scare the thing away. But before the ball could reach anything, it seemingly hit something invisible and bounced back at them. They had enough, and with no other options left, they called the police. Chief Inspector Jose Negri, along with 5 other police officers, arrived, probably assuming some sort of home invasion or domestic abuse, especially with how the entire family of 7 was huddled outside, keeping each other warm from the cold night air. The look of terror and exhaustion on their faces sealed the deal for the chief inspector that something real was very wrong. But he knew it couldn't be demons inside. Demons didn't exist, but his beliefs would quickly be shattered. The family walked in with the police officers. They explained that the phenomenon happened more when the lights were off, so they turned them all off. Luckily, there was plenty of light from the street lamps outside, but it left the house with plenty of unnerving shadows around every corner, which made the police officers a bit on edge. They sat in the living room as the police officers questioned the family. They explained the Ouija board, Estefania's weird behaviors, her recent death, and all the strange things going on in the house. According to the police report, it was during this time that the door to a small closet suddenly opened unnaturally, brushing the face of one of the officers. Another officer took out his servant's weapon to point at it, but after realizing there was nobody there, he holstered it. They turned on the lights for a moment to inspect. Closing and opening the closet door led them to believe there was no trick, and it could stay closed firmly on its own. They were still shaken by the incident when a thunderous sound came from the terrace. The police went to investigate, but upon arrival, they found no one there, and nothing that could have made that strange, almost metallic sound. They entered the home, now more cautious than ever to continue with the investigation and to continue with the questioning of the family. But then, they noticed something odd on the tablecloth covering the table, holding the telephone. A brown stain that was made by some sort of slime or drool that wasn't there when they entered. Then, as they went into the rooms to continue their investigation, they found a crucifix, which was perfect upon entering, now off the wall, with the Jesus ripped off of it. As one of the sisters placed the crucifix back, suddenly, 3 claw marks appeared on the poster next to it. At one point, the inspector went to the bathroom, and he felt a cold like his soul was being drawn out of him. Most all of that went into an official police report. Inspector Negri maintained that he believed something supernatural occurred there, but nothing really came of the night. The event started to peter out for the family, but then something odd happened the following year. A picture frame was found face down on the ground. When Concepcion picked up the photo of her daughter, she was shocked, as Estefania's face was burned, yet the rest of the picture, the frame, the floor, and the wall, all remained untouched. Then, the event stopped completely. The spirit was no longer there, and the family lived out the rest of their lives in peace.
Oh, creepy. An official police report and everything. What you got to say about that, bro?
It's still just eyewitness testimony, which, as I mentioned, isn't very reliable.
Certainly, but they are police officers, so it must lend some kind of credibility.
Not really, especially if any of them went in believing in the paranormal.
But what's the explanation, huh? Bet you got nothing.
Well, you'd lose that bet because I do have something. Big, actually. Originally, I would have said it could have been carbon monoxide poisoning.
Oh, what?
In 2022, the St. Lawrence County Public Health Department sent out a health warning that if you're experiencing a haunting, it may be carbon monoxide leaks. Specifically small leaks, because those can cause hallucinations. There have been some recorded cases of haunted homes that, after a leak was fixed, the haunting went away. This may even explain why ghost sightings were so popular during the Victorian era, with gas lamps being so common. So it might be perfectly reasonable to say they might have had a leak in the bathroom, maybe from a hot water tank. But that's not what happened here. Not even close.
You're gonna tell me he convinced you?
No. I decided to do some digging while you told your story. I came across this article from El Mundo in 2018, where they interviewed Ricardo and Maximiliano Gutierrez, two of the brothers. A movie was made the year before, loosely based off these events, called Veronica, and they wanted to clear the image of their sister. They go on to explain that Estefaniana wasn't into Ouija boards, nor the occult, that the whole story of the Ouija board was told by their mother, Concepcion, only after Estefaniana's death. In fact, they claim their mother was the center of all of this. They confirm Estefaniana did have epilepsy, and she was being treated for it, and it was a seizure that killed her. That many of their family had it, and exhibited similar seizures to what she had experienced. But the levitating and the speaking of strange languages was not true, something made up by their mother. They explained that their mother was very obsessed about the fact that there was something not right with Estefaniana, and that the family experienced the power of suggestion. This is a common occurrence with hauntings. It's believed that if you have strong beliefs in the paranormal, a simple talk with someone about what they might experience could lead you to experiencing a paranormal incident or misremembering a situation. Studies have proven this.
So, like how the police officers talked to the family before they started to experience all this weird stuff?
Exactly. They told them the whole story. Plus, the lights were off. It's like how after watching a horror movie, you could be spooked by something you imagined lurking in the dark, especially if you're tired.
Hey, you promised to never bring that up.
I didn't.
Oh, I actually, never get scared of anything. It's actually kind of crazy.
Right. They said that the closet door often opened because the photo albums in there would fall over. In fact, they had just opened it a few minutes prior to get some article clippings to show the police officers, and could have left it ajar.
What about the sound on the terrace, though?
Ricardo said it was him. He was instructed by his mother to impress the officers. So he went onto an adjoining balcony where he threw a rock and hit an iron part of the terrace, which created the metallic sound.
And the stain?
Baby food.
What about the crucifixes, the claw marks?
They said it was on the back of the door, and it just fell and broke. They believe the claw marks were just a worn-down spot on a poster from the crucifix swinging. It was always there. That's the power of suggestion. They got the police officers riled up, and they believed some very explainable things to be supernatural. Even now, years later, the chief inspector said in an interview that the closed door had opened several times, which contradicts the one opening that he put in the report. Their mother, Concepcion, kept telling her children to say things that weren't true, or else they might face punishment. But she also suffered from her own hallucinations, possibly due to her epilepsy or the medication she was taking for it. That, mixed with the power of suggestion, a bit of distress and grief from the death of their grandfather and sister, led to a lot of paranormal events.
Or perhaps they were too young to remember it correctly, and it was in fact paranormal.
I don't think so. Not the way they're talking about it. It sounds like a very traumatic experience for them, having to lie and keep it up for decades.
All right. While the authenticity of the Lazaro family case may be up for debate, the Gilmores face a very different kind of demonic possession. They didn't experience strange hauntings anymore, but as a warning, there's gonna be some gruesome deaths ahead. As you'll see, the spirit that Bessie conjured, which killed her sister, and then came after her family, would forever loom over them. Especially Gary, who Bessie was certain became eternally tethered to that demon on that fateful night. First, Bessie's husband Frank passed away in 1962 due to natural causes, and despite the abuse, they all mourned him. Bessie was still haunted, but she grew more reclusive and bitter as time went on. Her health and hygiene became poor, so much so that she got an infection. She was administered an antibiotic, but it didn't work, and she ended up passing away. What's worse is that she had a fear of eclipses all of her life, and even predicted she might die during one. Well, her predictions came true, as she died during a total eclipse on July 31st, 1981. Frankie, the eldest, lived a simple life, despite the mischief he took part in as a teenager, but he eventually disappeared from the family, as if he vanished into thin air. The youngest, Michael, suffered from vivid and frightening nightmares, much like Gary did. Ominous figures, rats, dreams of investigating a murder, only to discover he was the murderer. He even experienced a ghost, a woman who came for him, straddling his chest, forcing him down.
Which could be sleep paralysis, likely the same genes that Gary got from his mother.
Perhaps. He changed the spelling of his name, going by Mikhail, and went on to have a fruitful life, becoming a writer and then senior editor for Rolling Stone magazine. And he was an author of his memoir, A Shot in the Heart, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize.
Doesn't seem like he was cursed too much.
Well, he grappled with a lot of internal demons throughout his entire life, especially the fear that he had the same darkness that took over his brother Gary, but we'll get to that in a moment. Then, there's Galen, who had developed a distaste for authority figures and a bad temper, add in a fascination with crime, and it spelled disaster. He managed to relieve those impulses with only minor infractions though. Thievery, check fraud, public drunkenness. He was testing the waters of danger without fully diving into it. The real problem was he seemed to have an affinity for married women, probably due to his love of flirting with danger. First, he had an affair with his friend's wife. When his friend found out, Galen was brutally beaten, leaving his jaw broken. Then, Galen, not having learned his lesson, had an affair with another man's wife, and that man tracked him down and stabbed him several times in the lower abdomen. While he survived the encounters, substance abuse and poor health meant that the holes in his lower abdomen never fully healed. Several years later, he had surgery to fix them, but complications arose and he unexpectedly died. Then, there's Gary Gilmore, who drew the worst end of the straw.
Jeez, how do you get worse than that?
That name still sounds familiar. Why can't I place him?
Well, Gary, the son who was the most cursed by the spirit, was always rebellious, difficult, and getting into trouble. At a young age, he was drawn to a life of crime, like Galen, but he was much deeper into it. Not only did he look the part by wearing leather jackets with slick back hair, but he also played the part, stealing and showing no fear. He proved this with his wild stunts. He would walk across the trestles of a railroad as a train came barreling towards him. He wanted to see death up close, imagining what would happen if he didn't step out of the way. The train would blow its horn frantically for Gary to get off the tracks, but he would wait, staring down the train, a game of chicken with death itself, until the last possible moment before jumping to the side. He did this over and over again, just to feel the rush. While Galen loved to flirt with danger, Gary loved to flirt with death. As a teenager, he formed an automobile theft ring with his friends, but that was only the start. He'd find himself in and out of reform schools and prison, which would only fester his violence and anger. While he's behind bars, he learned of his father's death, so he tore up his cell and attempted to kill himself. He was never able to attend the funeral. After some freedom from the prison system, he ended up staying with a distant cousin, Brenda, while in Utah. She wanted to help reform him, integrate him back into society, but he couldn't stay away from the allure of criminal life. At the same time, he found himself a girlfriend, Nicole Baker Barrett. At just 19 years old, he was already divorced 3 times. But over the course of their relationship, Nicole grew frightened of Gary, from his violent tendencies to his criminal activities. Despite loving him, there were times when she could feel the presence of an evil spirit within him, like he was the devil himself. Finally, she had enough and took her 2 kids and ran away from Gary. He was heartbroken and angry, and that's partially why he did what he did that night. That, and because he had just gotten a new 1966 Ford pickup truck and didn't have the money to make the payments. So, on Monday, July 19th, 1996, Gary walked into an empty service station. Max Jensen, a Mormon newlywed, was nearing the end of his shift, only to find himself faced at the end of a .22 Browning automatic. Gary told Max to empty his pockets, and the young Mormon complied. Gary told Max to get into the bathroom and lie down on the floor with his arms under his body. Max complied again. Then something took a hold of Gary, and he walked into the bathroom, pointed the gun to the young Mormon's head, and said, "This one's for me." And he pulled the trigger. Then, he placed the gun against his skull and said, "For Nicole," and pulled the trigger again. The blood spread quickly, and he ran away, forgetting to take the wad of cash. But that wasn't enough for Gary's newfound bloodlust, and he still needed money. The next day, he was having trouble with his new truck, so he brought it to a nearby garage. Upon learning that it would take 22 minutes to fix, Gary decided to make an errand. Still fueled by the adrenaline of last night, he walked into a nearby motel and entered the lobby. Ben Bushel, the manager, another Mormon and a father to an infant son, was there to greet him. But Gary greeted the man with his .22 Browning automatic and told him to hand over the cash box, then to get on the floor. The man complied with every order, but Gary, like the night before, let something dark take him, and he placed the gun against Ben's head and pulled the trigger. Ben didn't die right away, and instead twitched on the floor. When Ben's wife entered to see the horror, Gary fled, and this time, he remembered to take the cash. He pocketed the money and hid the cash box in a bush. As he tried to shove the gun into another bush by the muzzle, he caught on a branch. He tried to push through, but the branch pushed the trigger, and it blew a bullet through the fleshy part between his thumb and palm. Clenching his hand, trying not to cry out in pain, he made his way to the garage to get to his truck. But he didn't realize he was leaving a blood trail. This is what the owner of the garage noticed. The man also happened to be listening to the police scanner when he heard of an assault and battery at a nearby hotel. So, the garage owner wrote down the license plate number as Gary pulled out, and then called the police. Police swarmed the streets to try to find Gary, worried he might kill again. It was around now when paramedics showed up to try to save Ben Bushell's life, but he ended up dying in front of his wife. Now this was a killing spree, and the cops wanted it to stop, no matter the cost. Gary, panicked by the police presence, broke into an empty house. He cleaned his wound and bandaged up his hand. Then, he grabbed the house phone and called his cousin Brenda for help. She told him to wait for her. Unbeknownst to him, she had called the cops and then told them where to find him. In her mind, he committed murder on Monday, then on Tuesday, and she wasn't going to wait for Wednesday. As time passed, worried Brenda wasn't coming, Gary left the house and got into his truck. Outside the house was a police roadblock, and he drove right through. They recognized the white truck and the license plate number, and a chase was underway. With nowhere to go, and police cars blaring their lights and sirens on his tail, Gary sped through the town to seek out Nicole. He just made it to Nicole's mother's house when he finally stopped. The cops swarmed him as he exited the vehicle, and then shoved him to the ground to cuff him. Nicole had come out to see the commotion, to realize it was Gary being cuffed by the police. She heard the chatter, describing how he'd murdered 2 people, and she wondered if he did it because of their breakup. Did she think him truly evil, guided by the presence she felt within him? He tried to plead his innocence, but with the witnesses, his stories didn't hold up. He finally admitted to it, but gave no reason for the murders. He also went on to say that if he hadn't been caught, he likely would have killed again, and that he should die for what he had done. For some reason, Nicole couldn't stay away from his pull, and now felt closer to Gary than ever. They ended up writing love letters to him while he was in prison, as many as 3 a day. They swore to be eternally bonded. He tried to plead a case for insanity during the trial, but the psychiatrist who interviewed him felt he was of sound mind and knew what he was doing. He was sentenced to death and given a choice to die by the noose or by firing squad. He chose the latter, worried something might go wrong with the hanging. Also, because he was raised in a Mormon household, he was following their belief in blood atonement, where he had to spill blood to wash him of his sins. Capital punishment had been outlawed in all states, then brought back to Utah just before Gary went to trial. He was gaining popularity, not just for being a murderer, but for being a symbol in the ongoing debate of capital punishment. Protests grew with religious and civil rights groups taking charge to save Gary. There hadn't been an execution in Utah for several years, and they didn't want Gary's to be the first in a long time. But Gary wasn't okay with this. So, he drummed up a plan with Nicole, where she smuggled in some sedative pills, and both she and Gary took them, hoping to meet their end like Romeo and Juliet. But they both survived the suicide attempt, and now they were cut off from communicating with each other, while Nicole was put in a psychiatric facility. He went to the Utah Board of Pardons to plead his case. He told the groups fighting for him to butt out. It's my life and my death, he told them. He wanted to be cemented in history as the murderer who wanted to be executed.
Oh, that's how I know him. There's songs about him, a movie even.
At 8 a.m. on July 17, 1977, everything was set for his execution. The volunteers were given 5 rifles, and one was loaded with the blanks so they could all feel removed from the responsibility of having killed a man. They placed the rifles through the square holes in a wall, aimed at Gary, who was strapped to a chair, and a paper target was placed over his heart, and a black corduroy over his head. When they asked him for his last words, Gary said, "Let's do it," and then he was executed.
Ah, but maybe the spirit demon thing died with him.
Hopefully.
Fun fact.
Fun? We just talked about an execution.
In 1988, Dan Whedon required a concept for a large-scale marketing campaign for Nike. He accessed inspiration from Gary Gilmore's final words, "Let's do it," and modified them to "Just do it." This tagline was later identified as one of the most successful of the 20th century.
Wait a minute, are you telling me that a Ouija board created Nike's tagline?
That's quite a stretch. I mean to take into account all the cause and effect.
Absolutely.
That is trippy. Tragic, but trippy.
Let me get this straight. So, you're claiming all the misfortune in Gary Gilmore's desire to murder was all caused by this spirit?
Indeed I am. There's a lot of evil in this world, Brew. You can't just think it's people wanting to be bad, and you might argue an abusive home, but all the brothers came from that home, and only one was a killer.
Well, there's more to being evil than just demons or an abusive home. When Gary Gilmore met with psychiatrists, they did determine him not criminally insane, but they diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder.
Would have thought he was a psychopath.
The thing is, psychopathy isn't really an official diagnosis. Even if we can recognize it, the inability to feel their own emotions and the emotions of others, technically, antisocial personality disorder is the official term, and it's a spectrum. What we know as psychopaths are on the extreme end of that spectrum. Those with this disorder usually lie, break the law, act impulsively and aggressive, can't hold relationships, and, most importantly, don't feel guilt for hurting others.
Why can't evil spirits be a contributing factor or a direct cause of these disorders?
Because a study was done by researchers from King's College London's Institute of Psychiatry in 2012, where the brains of men convicted of murder, rape, and violent assaults were scanned. A brain abnormality was found in those who had extreme forms of ASPD, with less gray matter in areas typically associated with understanding people's emotions. And another study was done by a team from the Mind Research Network in Albuquerque in 2020. They found that men who had committed or attempted murder had less gray matter in the areas associated with emotional processing, behavioral control, and social cognition. They do recognize emotions, they just don't necessarily feel them. But not feeling emotions doesn't mean you'll turn into a killer. Many with that trait end up doing well in society, living normal lives. Because they don't feel emotions, they can be charming and possibly manipulative, and excel in areas like business or politics. In fact, a study showed that 1 in 5 CEOs have psychopathic traits.
Well, that explains a lot. But what makes them go all, murdery?
Grimm already said it, the abuse. There's a lot of unknowns about ASPD, but it's believed it's both caused by genes and traumatic childhood experiences. Those who have a lack of empathy but are showered with love in the formative years of childhood tend to grow up leading better lives. Gary was likely born with difficulty feeling emotions, which he likely got from his father, while the other brothers didn't. Mix in abuse, and it sent him down a dark path. Plus, Gary often engaged in illegal substances, which can also amplify ASPD. So, not evil demons, just less gray matter in the brain and abuse.
Careful, my friend. While I would agree that it cannot be concluded that demonic forces were responsible for the Gilmore family's misfortunes, unless they scanned Gary Gilmore's brain to look at the gray matter, there are no conclusions that science can make here either.
Sure, but that's what separates science from speculation. Evidence. And besides testimony, there's no real evidence of anything paranormal going on in this story. But there is a real history of once unexplainable phenomena, like epilepsy, being explained away by the paranormal. That gap has been shrinking as we acquire more knowledge through scientific research. So until we can study and measure it, it's just stories and speculation based on the human imagination, like hauntings or Ouija boards.
Science only considers what it already has the tools to understand. But any scientists of merit will tell you that the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Ideas that were once considered blasphemy are now well-substantialized scientific theory, and once reputable scientific explanations are now viewed as ridiculous in hindsight. Maybe one day, science will develop the tools necessary to study and measure forces and entities that operate beyond the physical. Or perhaps, the paranormal will always exist outside the realm of empirical analysis. All I know is that as it stands right now, no one can conclusively say one way or the other.
As Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
One day, Brew, you just wait and see. For now, be careful of that Ouija board. I'll barely even touch the surface of the unforeseen and terrible consequences that can come from trifling with this conduit to the other side. Don't destroy it, and be sure to end your session. Or it could just be a toy. Your choice.
Hey, Grim, to end this session, we just... Wait, where'd he go?
I don't know. I don't know what's happening today, okay?
All right. Well, we gotta do this now. Hey, whoa! This thing is going nutso! S-U-B-S-C-R-I? Oh, come on, bro! Subscribe!
Yes, if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It's the best thing you can do to help us make more videos. Like this one, about a little girl who discovered her entire life was a lie when she saw a missing poster of herself.
Great. Can we end this now?